felt like that would have been a little, that would spread germs.
For all of us in college athletics and really throughout our country, you may have seen in the last hour, the Southeastern Conference has announced that collectively all 14 of its member institutions are suspending all athletically related activities effective at 5 p.m. today through April the 15th. What does that mean? That means absolutely no competition, no team practices, no team workouts, no individual workouts. Anything that has to do with being an athlete has been suspended within the Southeastern Conference. The services we will continue to provide to our student athletes is academic services, any services they need for injuries, or any services they need for their mental health. Athletics is not important right now. What is important is a very serious public health issue, and we need to do our part in college athletics to help our country make sure that this coronavirus does not spread, and that's what's important. Not only the health and well-being of our student athletes and our athletic department staff, but every person that they can and will come in contact with over the next several weeks. I want to thank Commissioner Sankey for his incredible leadership during the past several days this week. He has been at the forefront of this for us as a conference member institutions and nationally in his conversations and dialogues he's had with our other Power 5 conference commissioners. The SEC collectively has made several decisions this week. We have made those together as a conference and value the relationship that we have as our member institutions in a really difficult and challenging time to be able to work together to come to decisions that are in the best interest of not only our student athletes and our staffs on each of our 14 campuses, but again, across our country. So with that, I will stop right there and see if there are any questions that I can answer. Bob? I'm just going to go ahead and get it out of the way right here.
Okay. Hunter, the SEC say they're suspending activities at least until April 15th. What was your reaction to the NCAA canceling all the championship events going into, late June?
I was disappointed in how those, not necessarily that these were the incorrect decisions, Bob, but how those decisions were delivered. And I know we're working in a very imperfect environment right now, in an unprecedented environment. But one of the things I would have enjoyed having the opportunity, not enjoyed, but would have liked to have the opportunity to do was to discuss those decisions with our coaches and then with our student athletes, and that they find out from the right means, not through social media. And I don't have a great solution for how that could have been delivered better, but I know there's a better way to deliver that message than for me to find out when I landed back from Nashville yesterday, and for my student athletes and our coaches to find out. So again, I'm not saying it was the incorrect decision, especially for our winter sports. We had to make some decisions quickly in regards to the men's and women's basketball tournaments, gymnastics, swimming and diving, those indoor track and field, those championships that were imminent. But for our spring sports championships, those that are going to be held in late May and June, I don't think that was a decision that needed to be delivered yesterday.
Is there a scenario where baseball, the other spring sports, resume after April 15th? Where are you on that? And then spring football, is it reasonable to expect that you can get all 15 practices in?
Well, I don't think it's reasonable to, I'll start with the spring football issue, that without some type of waiver or some type of provision within our legislative body that spring football can finish, really we have to be done based on our academic calendar by the date April 25th. So that's not going to happen. That will be one of the things we ask the NCAA as a conference for some legislative relief, whether that happens during the month of May or if there's some coaching that can take place during the summer that normally cannot happen in the sport of football, as well as for soccer and volleyball or other fall sports that normally would be preparing for their fall season this time of the year. As far as our spring sports and those championships, I think it's still very much up in the air, any decisions on how to proceed. I will tell you, I think it will be extremely challenging for our student athletes and our coaches after taking a month off to quickly start a season back up again. So you got to think just the timing of that. If we are able to start practicing again sometime after April 15th, how many weeks of preparation you need to get ready to start a season again. It's going to be a challenge. So read into that what you will, but we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but that's still up in the air.
So basically with the calendar the way it is, do you just tell us all the spring sports are free to go since the campus, there's no classes, it's all online?
We have encouraged our student athletes and their families to make decisions that are in their best interest. At this point, again, it's not about them being student athletes here. It's about them personally. So we've encouraged them. We'll send out a letter later today to the parents of our student athletes that they make the decision for them and their family that they believe is in the best interest of the student. For some of our student athletes, in their best interest may be to stay here on campus, in our residence halls or in their own apartments that they have off campus. But we want really families to make that decision. I don't want that burden to make that decision for them. We're at a point where our student athletes and their families need to make those decisions.
Have you had any contact with athletes at this point, and what is morale like for especially these seniors?
They're struggling. Our student athletes, not only here at the University of Arkansas, but across the country, are struggling, especially seniors. You had some seniors that were prepared to compete for Southeastern Conference championships, some that had trained very hard to compete for national championships, and that's been taken away from them. And so it's roughly 24 hours. I'm not sure, as I walked around the Jones Center today, that it's sunk in for most of our student athletes yet, and that realism that their careers, especially if you're a senior, may have come to an abrupt ending, and that is the case if you're in the sports of basketball or swimming or gymnastics. May not be the case for our spring sports, but that's yet to be determined.
Hunter, I know that Mike Neighbors talked about the meeting he had, one of the hardest with his team. I'm sure you've met with some of the coaches. How hard was it to talk about what's happening right now with those coaches, and what were those coaches' reactions?
I think our coaches, we had a coaches meeting today at lunchtime. I think they're all very understanding. They're all in shock, but I think they're very understanding what we're going through as a country and really as a world right now with the coronavirus. So I think they're very understanding, but obviously they're disappointed as well, and they're disappointed for our student athletes, and because they know how hard they've pushed them, how hard our student athletes have trained, and what this means to them to not have the opportunity to continue to compete.
The NCAA has the coronavirus advisory panel that they've cited a number of times in the last couple of days. Do you know how much the SEC's decision-making is being informed from that panel, or are there other sources that are being used?
I would tell you, I believe Commissioner Sankey is using other sources. There's not been a great deal of communication, to my knowledge, between conference offices and the NCAA.
The NCAA also put out an advisory today about relief for student athletes in terms of their scholarships for spring students. To your knowledge, is the advisory applicable already? Can those students who were on scholarship this spring have another season of eligibility granted? What do you know of that situation?
I think it's something that's in discussion right now. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, Tom. It's just not about gaining another year of eligibility for your seniors. I mean, you've got juniors and sophomores and freshmen that have also lost potentially a season of eligibility. There's scholarship limit implications that go along with that. If you let your seniors come back and you've got fresh incoming freshmen. You will obviously go over your scholarship and roster limits for many sports, so it's just not as simple as saying everyone gets a year back. There's a lot more discussion and about the details before you can say that's going to happen.
Yeah, Hunter, so the coaches, like, can they have, like, if some baseball players, a couple guys want to meet with Dave Van Horn, are they allowed to do that, or is it pretty much like no contact? Or
as of 5 p.m. Monday, all meetings have to cease as well.
So, what are your coaches going to do? What are you going to do for the next few weeks?
I'm going to get ready for the 2021 season because we need to make that really special for our student athletes. And so we're already in the preparation for our fall sports for next year from a marketing, promotions, ticket sales standpoint and our strategic planning for that. So we'll spend a great deal of time on that. And we have a standing conference call as SEC athletic directors every 11 o'clock every morning for the foreseeable future, because this has been a fluid situation. I think it will continue to be for the next several weeks. And we have plenty to keep us busy. I will tell you, I will miss watching our student athletes compete tremendously. That is something that is just icing on the cake for most of us in college athletics, and that will be something that will be a huge void in my life for the next several weeks, as it will be for most of us in this room.
You have some athletes in track and field and swimming, and I've seen some others too with Olympic aspirations. Do they get to work with their coaches under this situation?
They do not. Again, right now what's more important is the health of everyone in our society. It's not about the athletic pursuits, and that may sound harsh, that I know that there's student athletes, both current and former, that have Olympic dreams, but I think that is a situation that's fluid and ever evolving. We had a student athlete on our cross-country team that was set to fly to Australia on Sunday for his Olympic trials with his country, and that's been canceled. So those are some things that I think are fluid as well.
Have you guys discussed, compensating stadium employees and hourly workers who won't get that income anymore?
Yes, we are looking into that. I mean, obviously, there's tremendous financial implications for us from a budgetary standpoint, and we're not worried about necessarily the finances, but we are going to try to take care of as many people like that. Like our Landmark people have been very, very good to us and how hard they work, and I know they're dependent, some of them as their primary source of income for that revenue, and so we're going to work with Landmark to see how we can support them.
If you've addressed this and I missed it, I apologize, but are we to assume the players are to be working out on their own? They can't get into the facilities until April 15th?
I'm not assuming that they're supposed to be working out on their own. I assume that there will be some that do work out on their own, but they will have no access to any athletic facilities other than the Jones Center, which houses our academic and nutrition center, beginning at 5 o'clock today through April the 15th.
The contracts for your coaches, postseason has a big, part of bonuses and contract rollovers. How do you address that with some of these coaches who are going to be in the postseason had this not happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, specifically, I'll address Mike Neighbors. I think it was very evident to all of us that our women's basketball team would receive a bid to the NCAA tournament, so Coach Neighbors and his staff that was eligible for bonuses will proceed with those, and then we'll address the others on a case-by-case basis.
What about those who have bought tickets, season tickets, specifically for those spring sports? Have you guys thought about exactly what you're going to do with those fans who refunds or ticket exchanges? What does that look like?
Yeah, we have some information in place where we'll provide refunds through everything's scheduled through April the 15th at this point in time, and then we'll address after April the 15th, and that can be in the way of a full refund or either credits to future ticket purchases.
From a practical application, you have a changeover in the football coaching staff. How does this impact Sam Pittman and his football staff in that this team's never practiced for him? And, moving forward, how tough is that for them?
Well, I'll let you know September 5th how tough that was. But obviously something that Coach Pittman and I had discussions over the past 24 hours. And again, we'll apply for some legislative relief to try to get our spring football practices in, whether it be during the month of May or June. But I think you'll find that the NCAA will provide some relief to most schools to make it equitable. Some have had a week or two of spring practice. Some have had none. Some are completed with their spring practice. And so that obviously puts us behind, but that's not what's important right now, Tom.
Yeah, Hunter, I'm not smart enough to know any of this stuff, but, you guys may have to refund tickets. I don't know how it works with, you don't get money from TV contracts because, your events aren't on the SEC network or ESPN or whatever. Do you guys have insurance in place to cover that? Or how does that work? Or what kind of financial hit could you guys be looking at
We're
taking?
still, our CFO, Clayton Hamilton's starting to run those numbers on what the financial implications could be. I mean, obviously, there's going to be lost revenue as we refund baseball and softball season tickets and single-game tickets that had been purchased in advance. There'll also be some expense saving on the side where we won't be chartering to any away games for the foreseeable future. We won't be using hotel rooms. We won't be per diem and money on food and things of that nature. So there'll be some expense savings, but there's also going to be some losses in revenues that we're going to have to address. But we've done a great job over the course of the last 5 years or so building up reserves, and that's what reserves are for, I guess you call them a rainy day fund, and I would say this is surely a rainy day.
There's a number of corporate offices around here that are closing or sending their employees home to work for the next few weeks. How do you address this with your employees in this building?
As far as the university is still open and will remain open next week, and we'll start handling that on a case-by-case basis. What I've asked our head coaches, I mean, they put a significant number of hours, is that for the time being, they remain local and accessible by phone. And I think you'll start to see some of our non-essential employees will allow them the opportunity to work from a remote location from their house as possible. But right now, the university is still open. I assume we will have some student athletes that remain on campus until spring break starts that we'll need to provide some care for, as I talked about, from an academic standpoint, mental health and nutrition.
Hunter, you said yesterday, there's no manual for this. There's not, you don't get this, how to handle stuff like this in a grad class in sports management or whatever. So what do you, personally for you, dealing with this, what do you draw up on to handle this and kind of lead, your department, the coaches, the athletes and all that?
I think what I've drawn upon is our senior staff and our head coaches, my colleagues from around the country, and just basic common sense. And really taking a step back and understanding that as much as we want this to be about sports, that right now it's not about sports, and that's not what's important. It's about everybody in this room, our student athletes, our staff, and making sure that we try to minimize the spread of the coronavirus as much as we can by eliminating these large gatherings and things that we've been advised to do. You got another question, Bob? That's shocking.
Yeah, you mentioned students will be able to get, different, like mental health services and academic services. Some of these kids have injuries they're rehabbing. Is the training services available to them? Do you outsource that? Or let's say a kid's trying to get over, like Isaiah Joe, may still need some rehab, for instance. Like, how do you guys handle that stuff?
No, the medical services will still be available to our student athletes. If they have an injury that they're rehabbing, what they have been instructed to do is contact their athletic training for their sport and schedule an appointment for their athletic training services. Our training rooms will not remain open, but they'll be by appointment only for our student athletes that are rehabbing from injuries.
At your opening, I think you mentioned academics and a few other. What about the food, the Jones? Is that open too?
That will be open. Yeah, that will be open. We'll have limited hours and limited menus because, again, we're trying to protect the employees that are working in that industry. But that will be open. So, again, we'll provide academic services, mental health professionals, the nutrition, dining facilities, as well as the medical piece.
When you were asked about the possibility of seasons resuming this spring, you said read into that what you will. In the discussions that you've had, and maybe just the knowledge that you have of athletics, do you think we've seen the last games played here for 5 or 6 months?
I think it will be really tough for student athletes to be away for a month and come back and really get geared back up. And, what you have to really start to think about is, from a student-athlete perspective, as an administrator, is it best to try to piecemeal together a half of a season with no national championship, or is it best, as we talked about before, to give each student-athlete a year back and let them come back and have a full competitive and championship experience?
You talked about if the NCAA decides to give seniors, or at least seniors, maybe other kids, a year of eligibility. I mean, like I said, there's a roster component to that. There's also a financial component. If they say, okay, it's okay to have 18 basketball players, that's, I don't know, a lot of money. I know SEC, schools are pretty flush with money, but do you feel like you guys could financially handle that if that were the case?
I do believe we can financially handle that, and we understand that those implications could be there because if you increase your roster size and your scholarship size, obviously there's a budget implication for that.
The various building projects you have going on, like with baseball and that, does that change now with this? I mean, do they kind of get suspended with what's going on?
That would be a great question for you to ask the construction companies. I hope not. I hope they're still working on those projects, but those aren't those are university projects, but we have outside general contractors that are building those facilities. So I hope they would continue, but I think it's inevitable that there'll probably be an interruption in those projects as they protect the welfare and health of their workers as well.